Good day, everyone. Welcome to Blacklogic. President Trump demanded homeless residents along his golf course route be removed, igniting fierce debate over compassion versus city image in Washington, D.C. In a dramatic escalation, Trump hinted at deploying the National Guard to restore safety in Washington, D.C., drawing sharp pushback from local leaders. An Israeli airstrike killed veteran reporter Anas al-Sharif and 4 colleagues. Israel calls him Hamas-linked, while press advocates cry foul. Despite mounting global outrage, Netanyahu insists seizing Gaza City is vital for Israel's security, fueling fears of massive civilian harm. Breaking with U.S. Australia moves to recognize Palestine. So the UK, France, as well as Australia is now recognizing Palestine as a statehood, which is signaling a diplomatic shift among key Western allies. Also, an investigation reveals how white nationalism group recruit online using propaganda and intimidation, building networks in plain sight. We're also going to touch on the silent replacement theory of how immigrants, whether they be from Africa, the Caribbean, or Central America, are trying to replace and have replaced foundational Black Americans in almost every industry and manufacturing job in America. President Trump ordered that the homeless individuals he passed en route to his golf course must move out immediately. So he's evicting homeless people from the grounds of Washington, D.C. alongside his golf route. And they face eviction from these areas, promising federal intervention if they do not move, even as D.C. crime rates remain historically low. Because and I'm a Washingtonian by nature. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I was born at Southeast Community Hospital. And when I was growing up in D.C., ladies and gentlemen, D.C. was 70% Black. That was because of white flight during that time, because initially there was a lot of lawyers, politicians, doctors that really lived in that DMV area, but mostly in D.C. Now, as they wanted more service people, more service jobs, more Black people start to move to the city. Then white flight tend to occur, and that is when a lot of the white residents start to move to Maryland and Virginia. Now, white people have started to return to DC because a lot of the so-called projects, a lot of the hoods and or low impoverished areas have been dismantled, and they've been renovated to have condos and small townhouses, and prices and the amount of rent as well as mortgages have raised significantly, almost 150%. So now Black people had to start to move to Maryland and Virginia and to travel further out in order to sustain their lives and pay for, again, these rising costs when it came to living in Washington, D.C. So now, even though majority of D.C. is still predominantly Black, but it's no longer Chocolate City, I think I believe Atlanta has taken the crown on that one. But nonetheless, D.C. is still majority Black. And then unfortunately, a lot of these homeless people that President Trump is referring to are Black. Okay, we have one of the highest, we're kind of like the big town, small city. We have one of the largest Black populations in America, as well as one of the largest Black homeless populations in America. So as I look at this, is this racial? Or is this simply he doesn't want to see poverty in, the nation's capital, which is supposed to be the most powerful country in the world? Or is this simply about economics? I'll let you guys decide for that. Because again, we're talking about crime. So the next news update for you guys here is about crime and how it relates to Washington, D.C., as well as Black Americans that are in that area. Because following the eviction orders, Trump hinted at deploying law enforcement, including the National Guard, to make D.C. safer and more beautiful. A claim that the city's mayor strongly rebuked, because now we're going to have National Guard troops to apprehend, to detain, to capture, to imprison so-called criminals within the nation's capital. Because it states here, ladies and gentlemen, that the U.S. military is preparing to activate National Guard troops in the nation's capital as part of President Trump's campaign against crime there. A Defense Department official said the president was expected to announce at a White House news conference on Monday that up to several hundred District of Columbia National Guard personnel will be sent to support law enforcement officers in the city. The official said, though crime rates in Washington, D.C. have been falling, Mr. Trump has claimed that they are totally out of control and has threatened a federal takeover. I will make our capital great again, Mr. Trump said in a Truth Social post on Monday. Now, granted, should the president take extra steps to make D.C. safe? Absolutely. Is the National Guard called for? Absolutely not. We have to understand that National Guard troops, just as well as active duty military troops, are for warfare, not for urban occupancy. Because when you have, again, military personnel, we are trained in riot, but we're not training into apprehending civilians in these particular cases. We're usually going after a particular target, okay, zip tie, interrogate, etc. But when it comes to American citizens and the apprehension thereof and detaining them to a certain degree, military personnel is not trained for urban warfare on the way that people believe. Now, granted, in Washington, D.C. is one of the most protected cities in the world because you have the FBI headquarters there. Within the DMV area, you have the NSA, the CIA, the FBI. You have Homeland Security. You have the Capitol Police. You have the D.C. Police. You have Maryland State Trooper, Virginia State Trooper. So again, he does not have to deploy National Guard troops. I don't understand the strategy behind this. And I just want to read this next paragraph for you guys to provide this a little bit of context. Ahead of Mr. Trump's scheduled meeting this week with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, Vice President J.D. Vance said on Sunday that the administration was working to set up a meeting that would also include President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. Now, I don't know how that pertains to the National Guard troops because he did deploy these National Guard troops inside of California. Now he's deeming that he's going to do that in D.C. as well, but there's no rioting in D.C. There's no rioting in D.C. And as I stated before, that officials within Washington, D.C. are stating that crime rates are actually falling. So in these regards, is this just a ploy to put on the face of criminal activity, just to deploy National Guard troops to show America's prowess when it comes to law enforcement? I want to know the bigger play here, because there's always what the government shows you and what the actual government means to do when it comes to actions on this particular level. Then in turn, will he use these National Guard troops in order to remove homeless people? That is what I believe. I believe that he's stating that crime is high, even though statistically, given the official reports, that crime in D.C. has been falling. He then will change the mission of the National Guard troops to assist and push out homeless people in those areas he deemed that are part of the Capitol grounds or around the nation's capital that it may pose as a security threat. That is my thoughts there, ladies and gentlemen. I can't take the accounts of this because the numbers do not support the president's claims. And again, I know there's a lot of hard Trumpers out there, a lot of MAGA concentrated people stating that, well, the president said this and the president say that. When are we going to start leaning towards science and math? When it comes to statistics, when it comes to data, it's like as though President Trump has came into office and now all statistics and math and data is thrown out the window, but we're making decisions based off the same information that when he's making decisions that does not support his theory and or ideology. It just blows my mind in those regards, ladies and gentlemen. So I have to take account for that as well. And here's a population of Washington, D.C., roughly 700,000. And majority of these people, as I stated before, are Black Americans. As you see here, the total population is around 700,000. The median age is around 35. The population of white people is 37%. Population of Black people is 42%. And Hispanic and or Latino is 12%. And other races, 5%. Okay. And it states here that the majority of the population and their age is between the ages basically of 30 and 35 years of age. So that is the demographic. So we know exactly who law enforcement, National Guard, as well as the homeless people, we know the majority of the population already. So again, I could dive into the FBI crime statistics to show you who are the most violent offenders in America. And I can let the cat out the bag and give you guys a huge hint. It is not Black Americans. It is not Black Americans who have the highest violent crime rate in America. It is not us. But just to keep you guys pondering, I want you guys to look at the statistics for yourselves. I would pop it up here, but I have a lot more to cover here this morning. But it will be intriguing to find out who's the class who committing the most violent crimes in America. Again, very shocking. Now, in a shocking assault, an Israeli airstrike targeted a press tent at Al Shifa Hospital, killing renowned Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 4 colleagues in what Al Jazeera said condemned as targeted assassination. And Israel claimed that al-Sharif was a Hamas cell leader, and an allegation media watchdog sharply dispute. Where is the information? Where is the evidence? Whatever happened to freedom of press? Because supposedly, in some regards, Israel has some of the same laws that America has, as well as other countries around the world, that they will allow people who are part of the press to come in and cover the story from their perspective, as long as they're not using propaganda to change the hearts and minds of people within the region. But they literally targeted a hospital where they knew that these journalists were housing at, or were staying at rather, because that was deemed a safe place. And they bombed that hospital to assassinate al-Sharif as well as 4 of his colleagues. And by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu, they still plan to seize Gaza City, by the way. They still plan to seize Gaza City because Israel proposed military takeover of Gaza City, pushing ahead with major ground operation, even as the global community, including press freedom advocates, condemned the assault on journalists. So now we're killing journalists, and now we're returning the days of old Israel where they're going to occupy Gaza City. Because again, and I hate to beat the dead horse on this one, I hate to beat the drum consistently and constantly on this, it's because Palestine is not a unified state. They don't have a unifying government body that is going to unify them by the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. So again, until international Western powers step in and somehow convince the UN to support this, this will continue to go on. And do not forget, the UK, France, as well as Australia is now recognizing Palestine as a statehood, but not the United States of America. United States of America has yet to come to the table and state the same. And again, Australia announced it will formally recognize Palestine as state at the upcoming UN General Assembly in September. And the move with conditions like Hamas exclusion and demilitarization aligns Australia with France, Britain, and Canada, increasing U.S. diplomatic isolation. So again, it seems though that America will be the only country that do not recognize Palestine as a state, as well as Israel. I wonder why. What are the connections? What are the ties here? So we're going to be the only Western nation after all this carnage and chaos and genocide and killings and bombings not to recognize Palestine as our own sovereign nation, at their own country. And again, these countries like Canada, Australia, the UK, Great Britain, as well as France, they're going to the UN and they're stating that we're recognizing Palestine as a statehood, and they are under mass occupation of one Israeli state, and we may have to deploy UN troops to that region to protect the innocent people. Now, granted, if they're doing targeted attacks where they're going simply after known Hamas fighters with, again, investigations and evidence and all sorts of intel that they can actually go after these particular people, randomly just indiscriminately bombing certain areas because of maybe false flag operations of Hamas in that area. Again, we're talking about almost 50,000 people, if not more, who have already perished because of this conflict in Palestine. So again, in some regards, I do apply the Western nations as a unifying body coming together, with the exception of America, of recognize Palestine. But again, protections need to be in place. As soon as they recognize this, they need to have an emergency UN meeting before, if not, and if I can read the reports correctly, I believe that Israel is already on the march, or they're planning to march here in the next 24 hours or so. But nonetheless, I'll keep you guys updated with that as well. But if not, they need to have an emergency UN meeting to recognize this. But let's not forget historical references, family. The UN partition plan. This is the reason why Israel is in the statehood in the region of Palestine, is because of the UN partition plan to give those East European Jews a land of their own. And so they just basically took land from Palestine. So this is why it's very important not only to recognize Palestine, but Palestine, you guys need to form a government and start to build a military. If not, this is going to continue to happen. But I promise you this, if they start to try to form a military without the support and assistance and help and protection of Western powers, I believe, this is allegedly, I believe that Israel would deem that the army that they're building is simply Hamas and new clothing. And they will then do the same thing they've always been doing, year in, year out, decade after decade. And we see that right here, right now. Now, we're going to talk about Kash Patel very quickly here. I'm not going to stay here too long, but I don't know if you guys are aware that Kash Patel is dating a 26-year-old, and Kash Patel is 45 years of age. No crime, no foul. But because again, there's always been, a large age gap between people who are very famous, who are very prominent, who are very in powerful positions. I won't say majority of them, but there's been a great percentage of them, whether it be entertainers or politicians, that date younger women and or younger men in some regards. Then it states here, as more heads rolled in, FBI Director Kash Patel letter to Agent Walter B. Gardenia informing him that he was being fired from his services. Gardenia lost his wife last month to cancer, and he worked on a case that sent Trump's trade advisor, Pete Navarro, to prison. Now, a lot of people are deeming this is a top story in reference to Kash Patel. No, it's this one right here. And this is the response from Kash Patel's girlfriend, Alex Wilkins, that they have a 19-year age gap between him and her. And it states here that Kash Patel girlfriend, country singer Alex Wilkins, addressed the issue of the 19-year-old age gap between her and Patel and said there are many people in the MAGA world with a huge age difference. In the MAGA world with a huge age difference. And she doesn't see any need to justify things like that. Wilkins said anyone talking to her would understand in a minute that she can't date someone her age, meaning that she's so mature, so intelligent. That's what I'm getting, that what she's stating, that in a minute that she can't date someone her age. I feel like within a couple of minutes talking to me, you probably couldn't picture me dating a 26-year-old, Wilkins said in an interview with Daily Mail. Wilkins is 26 years of age, while Patel is 45 years of age. It goes on to say, so it's always made a lot of sense to us and our friends and everyone around us, and there's really no need to justify things like this, Wilkins said, adding that the relationship is on a good path. Our future plans of engagement or even wedding. Wilkins said they are still easing on their new whirlwind life and are now able to start things that have been delayed by business and other things. That is not the hot part of the story, ladies and gentlemen. Let me blow this up for you guys who are looking at this from your cell phones. This is the part. Wilkins said she had to block the word honeypot from her Instagram comments as she was dragged into the Epstein controversy. She was accused of being an Israeli agent, a honeypot for which the administration closed the Epstein case. Patel and his girlfriend age gap fueled the speculations. Why? that news media pull her into the Epstein controversy and then linked her to being an Israeli agent. There's also information stating that Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli agent and that he was sex trafficking young women. Is it possible? Okay. And I'm just asking questions I really don't know. Is it possible that somehow this young lady could potentially be one of the Epstein underage women who were being sex trafficked? Again, I don't know what's in the files. Again, I don't know the names. I don't know the dates. This is yet to be released. But why link all these people together? Now, granted, Kash Patel said on Joe Rogan, and I'm quoting here, I'm paraphrasing, that there's nothing in the files that you want. What do you mean by that? There's nothing in the files that we will want. Okay, we don't want anything. We just want the files. We want the list, okay, to be released. And let us decipher it for ourselves. Let us comb through line by line, redact the victims, not the people who are being accused, but the victims. So we can look at this with, unadulterated, neutral, investigative eyes. So again, I wonder what's the holdup here when it comes to the Epstein files. I just wonder, why is it taking so long? And now that we're garnering and gaining more information, Kash Patel, who's the director of the FBI, who is supposedly going through hundreds of hours of Epstein video and audio and information files, stated that there's nothing that we want, even though the AG of the United States of America, Pam Bondi, state that, yeah, there's hundreds of hours of Epstein of child pornography and exploitation of children, of young girls. Interesting, is it not? And now we have Kash Patel's girlfriend somehow being linked to the Epstein controversy, as well as possibly being an Israeli agent. Again, I'm gonna let that lie where it lays, okay? Only because I need to wait for more information to come out to really speculate a little bit harder than that. But again, it goes on to state in the next paragraph, and I'm gonna leave it here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna leave it here. I think that it started with people wanting to find and really scraping the bottom of the barrel to find a justification for the fact they don't have this Epstein list in their hands, and they will go find it with pitchforks, Wilkins said. Oh, okay. And she goes on to say that the country singer says she started dating Patel years before she became the FBI director's girlfriend. And Wilkins met Patel at a girlfriend's party in Nashville, where she lives, a party that she wasn't initially planning on attending. Okay. Again, waiting for information to come out, but this is a story that the Times of India is reporting, no less. And Kash Patel ethnically and racially is Indian, by the way. Just want to point that out. So again, very interesting news here, folks, but let's move on to something more powerful and something that definitely needs to be covered, because it is the rise of white nationalism by the rise of white supremacy. And I'm gonna break this down for you guys, because though less immediate front page, the resurgence of white nationalist ideologies lurks ominously beneath recent headlines, because groups like the Patriot Front, they operate like pyramid schemes, seeking new recruits through fervent media production and intimidation tactics. And so I want to really break this down, because I think white nationalism is not the cousin of white supremacy. I really want to break this down for you guys, because this next segment is going to help you guys to understand the transformation and how white nationalism have always been a sense of white supremacy. Again, white nationalism is not a cousin of white supremacy. It is the child, its twin, and its mirror. These are not separate forces. They are the same ideology wearing different masks to adapt to the times. See, white supremacy was born in the blood-soaked soil of colonial conquest. Because when Europeans arrived in Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean, and beyond, they brought with them not just armies, but a belief system that white people were inherently superior to everyone else. This is white nationalism. They were inherently superior to everyone else. This was the moral fuel for slavery. Because do not forget, we were 1/3, 3/5 of a person, so to speak. This was the just call for genocide against indigenous people, American Indians, Native Americans that were red color, Asiatic looking people, as well as Black Americans and American Indians who were here prior to the slave ships arriving, who also were indigenous people and natives of the land. This is the conquest of Western Europeans and the colonization of entire continents. See, if you guys ever dove into the doctrine of discovery and you looked into the year 1493 that gave European nations religions and legal justification to seize non-European lands and enslave their inhabitants, this was not just conquest, it was codified white supremacy using religion. And if we fast forward to the 19th century as the US expanded the ideology, shifting from pure conquest to maintaining a white nation, and if we look into the 1790 Naturalization Act, restricted citizenship to free white persons, because don't forget during that time they also had indentured servants that were white. So this was restricted to free white persons. You also had the Jim Crow laws and segregation that ensured that Black Americans were locked out of economic and political power. We don't consider you guys as real people. You guys are just walking apes and gorillas and chimpanzees. Even to this day, we still hear this rhetoric. It is amazing what a lot of gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans can actually invent and create. It's amazing how you will lay down with some of foundational Black American women during this time. That means that you like to have, sexual intercourse with animals. This is nothing new. This is nothing new. So when I tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, as we move into the 20th centuries, you still have groups like the KKK that are around. See, the Ku Klux Klan were not just enforcing racial hierarchy, they were pushing for America to remain white, white, and white. This is the foundation of white nationalism. The belief that nation belongs exclusively to white people and must be preserved as such, as if people were not already here when the Europeans came on the shore back in the late 1400s. As the Spanish conquistador stated, Vasquez stated that when we brought 100 Black slaves to the shores between South Carolina and Georgia, and they rose up and ran off into the woods, they ran off into the woods with people with dark melanated hue skin, just like them. And this was the first record of Black people being brought to the Americas, but no less the reports on paper by Western European powers saying that there were Black people already on the land. Very, very interesting, is it not? But they're trying to call white nationalism about culture. But this is the supremacy. Because today's white nationalists would tell you, we're not supremacist. We're not supremacist. We just want to preserve our heritage. But let's strip away the euphemisms. People would tell you that the Southern flag, the Confederate flag, that is not about racism. That's not about slavery. That's about Southern pride. What does Southern pride have to do with your flag of a nation at the time that lost the battle? I thought the United States of America flag was a flag that we all pledge allegiance to. So you're waving around and you're holding up a flag of losers, a flag of an army that was conquered by the Union. And whether it be the 13 colonies or the now 50 states, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This is the United States of America, and that the Confederate flag has no right to be swung, held, raised in any state, any city, municipality, yeah, you have the freedom to fly any flag at your home. But when it comes to the governance therein on any level, local, state, and federal, the Confederate flag needs to be burned, chopped up, chewed up, doodled out, and buried to oblivion. It should not even have a place in America. Because even though you say it's about Southern pride, this is really about trying to revise and or remember a time where white people subjugated black folk, where white people could hang and kill black folk without any justification and not even see 1 hour or 1 day of jail or prison time. This is the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen. But this is what they would try to tell you, that white nationalism is about heritage, that it's not about white supremacy. Well, as I stated before, it is. And I think it's very important that we strip away the euphemisms. Because if a group wants only one race in political, cultural, or territorial control, this is supremacy. Preserving heritage becomes a tool for excluding others, which is exactly what white supremacy has always done. And granted, you have modern day examples like the 2017 Charlottesville rally chant, "You will not replace us," that mirrors 1920s Klan fears of racial mixing. You guys heard these chants before. I just showed you, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the rallies where they were stating that you will not replace us. And this is a neo-Nazi and white supremacist march through the University of Virginia campus in Charlottesville, Virginia. You will not replace us. And they were mainly targeted at Jews, blacks, and non-white Hispanics, as well as Asians. This is about white on white. And what people fail to understand, yes, there was a time that you had countries like the Netherlands, Greenland, Switzerland, some parts of Ireland where you had this Viking culture. And they started on conquest of plunder, rob, kill, steal, rape throughout Europe altogether. And then you had the Christians. Then you had the Knights of Templar. Then you had the Pope during that early 1400 to really kind of unify certain European countries to fight against the Vikings. And then a lot of the Viking culture started to fade away and Christianity took over. And then they said, brethren, why fight amongst ourselves where we have those Gentiles? We have those heathens that are not the same complexion and racial background as we are, that we should go to their lands and conquer them, kill them, steal them, rape their women, and change the very demographics of their lands to make it our own. How do you think the colonization of Africa occurred? How do you think the colonization of India occurred for almost 100 years? How do you think the colonization and conquering of New America, or the New World, also known the United States of America, during that time, we were just calling it the New World? That there's just these people there who are very rambunctious, that they're primitive, that we could easily destroy and take over their lands because we have rifles, we have cannons, they just have bows and arrows. And so they did. But now, ever since the commander-in-chief is in office the second time, white nationalism has risen again. And again, we refer a lot of these back to historical references, like the immigration laws. This kind of proves the connection, ladies and gentlemen, that the 1924 Immigration Act severely limited non-European immigration to keep America white. And this was a white nationalist goal that was rooted in white supremacy racial hierarchy. Have you noticed that they really wanted to do these things after the country was already built by foundational Black Americans? Did you guys notice that? So they said, we still need a working class. We still need these Black people here. We still need the Negro in regards to uphold our services and infrastructure so we can sit fat, happy, and nice. Now, granted, this white nationalism, this white supremacy ideology, this doesn't pertain to all white people. Not all white people participate actively in the system of white supremacy. Absolutely not. Not all white people had the same ideology of white supremacy and white nationalism. So again, I'm excluding those people. So again, trigger warning, I'm not talking to you guys. But they said we have to separate. And in these terms, we have to segregate. Because again, why do you believe that redlining and restrictive covenants that lock foundational Black Americans out of certain neighborhoods, that maintain white-only communities? I believe there's a group now that bought, 20,000 acres of land in Arkansas or Alabama somewhere, and they're returning to the roots. And what they're doing is they're taking the playbook, they're taking the strategy of Afrikaners out of South Africa's, those quote unquote Boers, where they have bought land in South Africa so they can have a white only town. They're doing it in America as well. And then I know there are some people that are stating that Black Americans are doing the same. Why would you think that Black Americans would do this? Because of racial mixings have always been bad for us. Anytime that we started to build and gain weight to start really compete economically with other groups of people, they have always found laws, whether it be economic, political, or by force, to decimate and destroy our progress. That is just the truth of the matter. Yeah, it's very easy for people to get online in your comment section and say, no, you Negroes are just lazy and this and that, and you don't want to work. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get on the replacement theory here. We're going to talk about it because these white supremacist narratives stating that a group of people who built the country and then were all in all these industries that upheld the nation before we were replaced by immigrants. All of a sudden, we're lazy. All of a sudden, we're stupid and dumb and low IQ. Even though we have many scholars, many achievements and advancements in math, engineering, science. Have you noticed I'm not naming sports? I'm not naming entertainment and comedians and actors and actresses because no, that's something that came for us later. Even before we had the opportunity to be on the big stage, so to speak, to even garner a way to be on television, we were always in the medical field, the engineering field, the math field, the science field. We were revolutionaries in all of these fields prior to entertainment. Now, as if that's the only thing that Black Americans can do is bounce a ball, catch a ball, throw a ball, dance a jig on stage, tell a couple of jokes, or act. It's much more to us than that. And if we look at present day, politicians they're pushing, okay, especially with the last administration. They push for mass immigration, and now you have this administration that's pushing for mass deportation, America first, and I applaud it in those regards. See, white nationalists deny being supremacist because supremacy is universally condemned. They just can't come out and say it. You know, there's only groups like the neo-Nazis and the KKK that would just come out and state that, yeah, we don't want no Black people here. We don't want no Hispanic people here. We don't want no Asian people here. We just want us here. We conquered this land. We almost extinct the Native Americans. I don't care if they were black, red, white, blue, or green. We almost extinct them because we no longer want them in our land. We took over this land. But when you have white nationalists, they won't just come out and say it because they understand that universally it's condemned. They rebrand to sound less extreme, just as the Klan once swapped robes for business suits in the mid 20th century. So they say, you know what? We're being too blatant. We're walking around here and we're showing people who we really are. Let's change out our hoods. Let's change out our robes for business suits so they can't know who we are, but we can still subjugate them. We can still limit them. We can still persecute them economically. So that's what they did. And that's what they're doing. Because a wolf in a business suit, okay, a wolf in a business suit is still a wolf. White nationalism is simply white supremacy that learned better public relations. That's all they did. They say, you know what, this is not being accepted on a wide scale stage. So let's have better public relations. Let's put on suit and ties. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the ideology is still the same. The ideology is white people should dominate the nation. Others are threats to that dominance. The state should protect whiteness. And in some regards, that is why people are loving President Trump, because they are deeming him and stating that he is the supreme chief and commander of neo-Nazis and white nationalism that equates to white supremacy in this nation. That's why people were criticizing his cabinet. Wait a minute, you got an Indian in there? Whoa, wait a minute. You was about to have 2 Indians in there. And then Ravik Waswamy had to step down. But we still have Kash Patel, and I believe there's another black guy in there somewhere. But definitely he came inside the office and changed the demographics. Were the liberals or Democrats better? No. Just because you have black faces and white spaces don't mean that they're going to do anything for anybody other than white people. That doesn't mean that. They was just shields. That was just symbolism. Let's put a couple of black people in here and there, and they're going to believe that they have arrived. They're going to believe that they're now successful. They're going to believe that they're now going to do something for these people. Absolutely not. It's a sham either way you see it. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You can dress white nationalism. You can dress it up. You can dress it up and call it patriotism. Wave a flag instead of a burning cross. But no matter what you wave, whether it be a flag, a burning cross, it's still poison. It's still poison. Let's get on it. The silent replacement theory. Now, the term silent replacement, I'm jumping right in, ladies and gentlemen. I'm jumping right in. In the context of immigration, labor, and the Black American workforce refers to a widely discussed and debated issue. Whether immigration, particularly or low-skilled workers, negatively impacts the employment prospects and wages of Black Americans, mostly in those with less education. That's what we're referring to today, the silent replacement theory. The silent replacement theory. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the new face that has been probably here in the past 20 years or so of construction. The face of the farmers in America. And who run them. Because again, if I toy back to the KKK, have you noticed that the KKK is still around? The KKK is still around. The KKK is still an organization, but organizations that was constructed to protect Black Americans, to assist us in our protection and poverty. Groups like the Black Panther Party, as well as the Black Liberation Army. They no longer exist because of COINTELPRO. Okay, I can do a systematic, comprehensive breakdown on COINTELPRO because before COINTELPRO, they had other operations to depress and subjugate Black people so they could never get to a point where they had the numbers to compete against white economics. So again, this is the face of America when it comes to constructions and some service jobs. This is a face of America of Black immigrants from all over the world coming to America. See, they had to get rid of the Black Maroons because they're fighters. So they had to give them their own piece of land in the Florida area so they won't continue to annihilate and kill people who were trying to take their rights from them, the right just to simply to live. So when I look at the demographics today and how the silent replacement theory coincides with Black Americans and how we've been kind of forced out of the workforce and a lot of industry, let's start with the facts. Because for centuries, foundational Black Americans have been at the center of this country's hardest labor, from enslaved labor building the early agriculture economy to Reconstruction era Black craftsmen and sharecroppers to the 20th century migration north, where Black workers filled factory floors, shipyards, and construction crews. You guys grew up. And they said that, you know, your father works at the manufacturing plant. They work up in Michigan and Detroit. They're manufacturing tops and spins and bolts and nuts and cars and all the sorts of things. Majority of those jobs were Black American jobs. And granted, there were immigrants here then, but we don't understand what occurred during that time, do we? We don't understand what happened during that time. But in the mid 20th century, The U.S. government began shifting, not subtly, right? The way it shifted, or the way that it was staffed, was by the way they adhere to the nation's labor needs. Have you guys ever heard of the Bolsonaro era? Bracero, the Bolsonaro era, opening the doors between 1942 and 1964. And this was during World War II. America faced a labor shortage. And the answer was the Bolsonaro program. That under agreement with Mexico, the U.S. brought in approximately 4.6 million Mexican laborers, legally constructed to work in agriculture, railroads, and other industries as well. This was the first major modern policy that officially placed large numbers of foreign-born workers into roles historically occupied by low-income Black Americans, as well as prominent Black Americans who could retain those jobs as supervisors and managers. And this mostly occurred in the South and the West, and some in the East by the program's peak. Farms and railroads that was once relied on Black labor were now running almost entirely on immigrant workforce. See, when the Bolsonaro program ended in 1964, the door, it opened and it stayed open, and they started pouring in, whether it be legally or illegally. When we look at the 1965 Immigration Act, that was somewhat the turning point, because just 1 year later, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that Black Americans helped to get signed. And on paper, it was about fairness, ending the racist nation origins quotas that heavily favored Northern and Western Europeans. Because at one point in time, the Italians, the Irish that were coming over here, these are the only ones that can get these jobs. Again, boxing out Black Americans at every turn with different groups of people. We couldn't really be police officers. We literally had onesies and twosies in law enforcement in certain cities and states. The majority of them, especially in New York, New Jersey, were Irish. They literally took over this when it comes to construction. Italians, by the way of the mafia, no less. Now, in practice, it completely shifted immigration patterns. And this law replaced racial quotas with family reunification and skilled work preferences. This meant two things. This meant only two things: massive immigration from Latin America, feeding construction, agriculture, and service labor markets, and a surge of Asian immigration that was filling tech, engineering, and medical fields, especially after the 1970s. And the racial composition of the immigrant labor force transformed almost overnight. And again, this is no plight. This is not being divisive to Hispanics, Asians, Italians, Irish, white people. No, this is the truth. This is the way that the system, and the system which is upheld by the system of white supremacy and white nationalism, based upon the ideology of a few that are very influential, by the few who have the power, the money, in order to do these things, to pass legislation or the lack thereof legislation in order for these things to occur. And yet we still have people believing that this is just rhetoric, that this is simply not the truth. I've even had Black Americans in some regards tell me that whatever that the system, the government reports, that they believe is accurate and true. Are you serious right now? Do you guys remember that big documentary that came out about the NSA and how the NSA was collecting intel on American citizens? I'm not even referencing COINTELPRO. I'm talking about just everyday citizens, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and otherwise. They was collecting data, what was against regulations and policies, but they were subpoenaed in order to do so. The CIA as well. And you guys really, truly, and here's another thing. There's a lot of people out there deal with conspiracy theories, even though a lot of those conspiracy theories claim to be true in some regards or not. But we're just going to believe that the accounts and the results that we see with our two truthful eyes of the reality that we're in? Because again, the data shows who works where. This is what the data show. If we fast forward to today and the numbers speak for themselves, and we look at the demographics of certain individuals, it's almost like we're playing tug of war with immigrants, Black and otherwise. Nearly 48.7% of the foreign-born labor force is Hispanic and or Latino. And do not forget that Haitians, when it comes to America, are categorized as Latino. About 25% is Asian, and about 11% is foreign-born Black workers, largely from the Caribbean and Africa. So if we broke this down, let's talk about construction. When we look at the construction field, you don't see this anymore, do you not? You mostly see this. Because over 1/3 of all U.S. construction workers are Hispanic, up from about 24% in 2011. In states like California, Texas, and Florida, the percentage passes 50% of the construction workforce is Hispanic. And we will look at service jobs like hotels, restaurants, domestic work, roles where foundational Black Americans once held strong footholds, now are overwhelmingly employed recently by Hispanic and Black immigrants. In tech, in the field of tech, Asian immigrants dominate Silicon Valley, hiring pipelines that is bolstered by H-1B visas and targeted recruitment since the 1990s tech boom. That's why all these tech jobs are going to Asian. This was systematically done, ladies and gentlemen. They didn't want Black Americans to get into tech. And even to this day, we have a low representation, a low percentage margin of Black people in tech. This is by design. See, here's the thing. They say, well, you got welfare, that's your subsidies. But see, when immigrants come over here, and a lot of these immigrants, again, are the top 10% of their nations, meaning they already come over here with some substantial amount of wealth. Then the government subsidizes their loans. The government grant their money, meaning that they give them free money. They give them subsidies. They decrease their interest rates on loans. They go to school for free in some regards. I did a whole breakdown of this last year. Very powerful breakdown, ladies and gentlemen. But you have all these different fields: construction, service jobs, tech. And when it comes to logistics and warehousing, a growing share of management and operational roles are filled by foreign Black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean. This is the silent replacement theory, or that the silent replacement reality of foundational Black Americans, as if none of us want to work. We just want to stay on the block and chill, smoke marijuana, and do absolutely nothing. That is the racial and white supremacist ideology that a lot of people have, is it not? Leave it in the comment section. Give me your hate. Give me your difference of opinion. Give me your perspective and narrative. Because again, the research from the National Bureau of Economic Research shows that immigration has reduced wages and job opportunities for low skill and middle income native born foundational Black Americans, especially in urban centers. And in some cases, economics link that these job competition higher, that it leads to higher incarceration rates among young Black men, especially during the 1980s and 1990s. See, when you go to Africa, when you go to the Caribbean, when you go to certain parts of Asia and certain Asian countries, when you go to certain parts of Europe, the conclave of people, mostly men, who are unemployed, who are still trying to fade to suffice their life, yet alone their family's life, they deal in crime because of the lack of opportunity. See, America doesn't have a lack of opportunity. It just subjugates and limits opportunities for one particular group, foundational Black Americans. And I know a lot of you will say, where's the lack of education? You guys are not going to school. Yes, we are. High percentage rates of school have increased. but yet we're still not a majority of the workforce. Well, you guys all third on the population list. I'm just giving you some of the rebuttals that I hear. You guys are roughly what, 13, 14 to 15%, where Hispanics are 19 to 20%. And white Americans are what, 65 to 70%. Then you have Asians on the rise at around 12 to 13%. They're almost reaching the same percentage rates of Black Americans. So let's be clear. This isn't about blaming immigrants. Okay, even though in some regards it's the foundation of it, but this is not about blaming immigrants. They are working within a system designed by U.S. policymakers, or the lack of policy and not enforcing the policies that are already in place, like the Biden administration, that allow 11 million illegal immigrants inside the country. They derived and came from Central America, Africa, the Caribbean, Asia. They came from all over the world. And this is the same system that historically undervalued and underinvested in the Black American community that built this nation. So did the government intend to replace foundational Black Americans in the labor market? The official answer, in my opinion, is yes, because that is the document reality that I read. And they have enacted policies that consistently made it easier for industries to hire foreign-born workers. President Trump and Elon Musk stated that themselves, they have plenty of people on H-1B visa working for their companies. Why in the hell didn't you guys hire Americans, so-called America first? And they enacted these policies that has consistently made it easier for industries to hire foreign-born workers while failing to protect or restrain the Black workforce for changing the economies. Because when I look back from the Bassarero program to the 1965 Act, to the modern day H-1B visa, tech visas, Einstein visas, etc., to me, the pattern is clear. When the industry needed cheap agriculture labor, they turned to Latin America. When the industry needed service workers, they welcomed more Black immigrants that wouldn't buck up, because if they did, your ass would be deported quicker than you can say, foo-foo. When industries needed tech talent, they expanded to Asian immigration, mostly from China, Japan, Korea, and the concentration, India, because that's even cheaper labor coming from India. Because when we look at the currency equivalent and ratio, yeah, our money is worth a little bit more than Japan's, but not much. Same as Korea, but not much. But when you take the American dollar to India, believe me, we're talking about tenfold. Again, I really need to point that this is not about pointing fingers at other workers. It's not. Because believe it or not, foundational Black Americans, we work hard as well. And we are American citizens. And how everybody else identified their own subsects, cultures, and groups, so do we. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing a system economic shift, one that left foundational Black Americans watching industries that once dominated slip away. And the history is here. And the history is there for us to read and understand it for ourselves. The numbers are there. And the question we should be asking is, if the government could move this aggressively to build a pipeline for immigrant labor, why couldn't they invest the same energy in rebuilding and protecting Black labor? That's what people do not understand. You have invested in giving money and provided subsidies and paved the way for people who are illegally in the country and legally in the country to do better than the natural born Americans that were already here. And just for you guys, I know there's a small percentage of white people that this have occurred to as well. But the vast majority of these people have been foundational Black Americans like myself. So when I tell you guys this is not just rhetoric. This is the truth. As the statistics shows, the government moved very aggressively to build a pipeline for immigrant labor. That's why you have certain immigrant groups doing certain industry and certain jobs throughout our country and our infrastructure as well as our economy. And the only question is, and I believe we all know the answer, why couldn't they invest in the same energy in rebuilding and protecting Black labor? Because until we answer that, history will keep repeating itself. And if you ask me, it's because they understand there's restitution, there's recompense, there's repudiation, as well as reparations that need to be paid. And as long as they ignore us and replace us, they will never have to pay us.